Welcome to another edition of Jack in the Booth. I'm Jack McShane. Now, our guest this week is Kevin Dexter. Kevin is an instructor at the Hofstra Sports Journalism Institute, and he also is the play-by-play voice of the Long Island Nets. And coming up, you'll hear his thoughts on the NBA bubble and how that compares and contrasts to what MLB is doing. And we also touch base on the impact of high school players making the decision of whether or not to go straight to college or go right to the G League. But first, we touch base on the virtual program at Hofstra and why that's been so successful.
It's been a lot of fun. I think the best part about it, like the biggest advantage we have, is reaching a whole bunch of new students that we wouldn't originally have. As you know from the past, we have a couple of kids that will plan a vacation to New York City around a week of classes. We've had kids from Toronto, from Texas, do that with their families, come back every summer. But for the most part, we have kids from Long Island and maybe a couple from upstate New York or New Jersey, Connecticut, making a day trip. But it's really opened up that kind of the horizons to a lot of different kids, which I think is a huge benefit of virtual. I mean, we got classes at night with kids from California who are, in the afternoon their time. We had two kids from, two international students. We had a kid from Mexico and a kid from the Netherlands who was hanging out in France while he was doing our play-by-play class. It was kind of funny to think about. So I think that has been the coolest thing for me. And the ability for us to just adapt it to virtual has been fun. I mean, obviously there's some things that you can't really get that full experience without being in person, but for the most part, we've realized that you can do play-by-play on Zoom and work with a partner. You don't need to be sitting in the same room. And we've seen that in professional sports now, that people are in the studio while the game's going on somewhere else. And it's given those kids still that same experience, and a lot more kids, as I said, because we're reaching a lot more different kids from a lot more different places.
And I wanted to mention that because when I was talking to Dan about this, we mentioned the fact that it actually benefits the kids to be able to call a game off a monitor, because most of the professionals, like you said, are doing that too. And, the importance of bridging the gap between doing it in person and virtually is obviously really important. But you seem to think that you guys have done a pretty good job with that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are certain things you can't do. Like, for example, we can't give a student the experience of sitting behind the desk and anchoring and reading off the teleprompter. But I can still work with them. We have our TV anchoring class, and I work with them on, how a rundown gets put together, for a show, and how they should write their scripts and read highlights and, throw to a SOT and word all that different stuff. And we still are able to record it on Zoom. Again, they don't have that, sit on the back of your jacket, smile at the camera kind of experience, but we can give it to them in a little bit of a different way. And, and to be honest, as much as the play-by-play stuff, as you mentioned, is going, remote now, I wouldn't be surprised if there were more jobs that were remote where it was more, anchoring style stuff or hosting style stuff from your own home. So I think that experience and any way you can get it is going to be beneficial for these kids down the line.
And what are some of the ways you guys are doing to promote this? Is it just online? Like, how have you been able to get the word out to all these people across the country?
It's a great question. I mean, me and Dan run the social media. I mean, I do my best, and I know Dan, does as well, to tweet as often as possible with what the classes are coming up. Instagram, we have Facebook, but I feel like, the kids are not really on Facebook, so I don't post as much on that. Mostly just try to Instagram stories and stuff, or especially when we have guests, like, hey, we had Jared Greenberg last week, who's on the sidelines for the NBA on TNT from the bubble. Like, hey, this is really cool. If you come to our classes, you might get to talk to somebody like that. So I try to promote those things. I think a lot of it is just kind of word of mouth, but B, parents looking for something for their kids to do. I mean, there's so many people that maybe don't have the biggest interest in this, or they do have an interest in this, but they're so focused on playing sports. And now because they can't play in their youth leagues or weren't able to in the summer, hey, maybe this would be a good thing to do to occupy my time because I don't have to play soccer 6 days a week or basketball 5 days a week, whatever it is. So I think that's definitely helped, in terms of people just looking for something to do. And our program comes up on Google or social media, and they sign up, and it's been great.
And that's the way it's always kind of been. You guys have always preached that anybody can come, right? If you don't have to have any experience. And, that's kind of why the program's been so successful. I mean, when I first came, I really didn't have any experience, and, it's been obviously pretty successful so far. I mean, I'm still not great, but,
Well, you're improving every day, Jack, every day.
Well, I want to transition. I know you mentioned Jared Greenberg. I want to transition to the NBA bubble. and talk about how successful that has been so far. I mean, there's been very minimal, if at any, coronavirus positive tests so far. And also there have been some stars that have gotten recognition, including Devin Booker and Damian Lillard. How good do you think that is for the NBA to get these guys who play in, smaller market cities to get the recognition that they deserve, especially now?
Yeah, and they've been arguably the two best players. I know the Suns got eliminated even after their 8-0 seeding
Right.
game start. But I mean, I think if you're you're not even a diehard fan, if you're just an NBA fan, you know how good Damian Lillard is. But now more eyeballs, I think, because of the time of year. There have been no sports for so long. More people are probably watching games, especially in the afternoon, right? They're working from home. You could throw on a game at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And being able to see a guy like him, the way he's played, I think has, gotten him a little bit more recognition. I mean, he's a guy who's been an all NBA for the last, better part of a decade. So I think people for the most part, know how good he is. But like the one game that jumps out to me, was a late night game, the last seeding game in which they clinched the playoff spot against the Nets. Nets trying to send the Blazers home. And, Lillard had 40 something. Karis LeVert was awesome. Another guy who's really, kind of taken advantage of the situation in the bubble. So, I just think it's fun all around to have these games on all day and to get more eyeballs, especially after we haven't had sports for so long.
And I also want to mention that I think a lot of people haven't really talked about is that the 8 teams, I believe, that aren't in the bubble and the effect that will have on them having this long layoff. Do you think there's any things that the NBA can do to maybe help them? I know they talked about maybe doing something, but I'm not really sure.
Yeah. As of yesterday, there was a report about voluntary in-market workouts.
Right.
So for those 8 teams, or the Delete 8, as they have been termed,
Right.
I've seen online, which made me laugh. Voluntary in-market workouts. So I think that would look different for a team like the Knicks, who are obviously trying to develop young players, compared to the Warriors, who obviously had essentially like a gap year with
Right.
Klay Thompson hurt and Steph Curry hurt for most of the year. And now those guys, they can use it as a way to get back in shape to, try to get back to contender status next season. So, I think it's going to be different based upon each team, but at least there's something, it seems like, where they can get in market, work out, try to prepare for a December or January start to next season.
Now, I want to compare this NBA model kind of to the way the MLB is doing. I mean, the NHL is kind of doing the same thing with this bubble thing. Do you really think the MLB can finish this season? I mean, we've seen so many postponements and cancellations because they're doing it where each team plays in their home ball. I mean, obviously, except for the Blue Jays, but each team plays in their home ballpark compared to the NBA where everybody's in a bubble. But is it even possible for the MLB to do that, though?
I'd like to think they are going to finish the season, but I do think it is going to be difficult. As you said, because of all of the positive tests. I mean, you just look at the schedule for the Cardinals, right, after they were out for basically 3 weeks because of their, their rash of positive tests. So how are they going to, they're going to have to play doubleheaders every day. Now, I've heard people bring up, does that actually give them an advantage because they play these doubleheaders every single day and then they go to play another team who hasn't played these doubleheaders and maybe they get used to that. And does that provide an advantage even instead of, having to play more games? Hey, we're used to playing these doubleheaders now. So it's going to be interesting. I think if they can avoid another breakout like that, they'll finish the season. But, if we get another situation where a team, especially a team that's in contention, right, has to sit on the sidelines for 2 to 3 weeks, it's going to be interesting. Do they push it back? Try to, you're playing playoff games then in November when it's really cold in a lot of the, northern market cities. It'll be very interesting. I would bet, if I had to bet, that they will find a way to finish just because of the money involved. And they wouldn't come this far and cancel the season, especially after the breakouts that we've seen. I think that might have already sidelined it, but I guess in 2020, anything is possible. We've certainly learned that, that's for sure.
And now we saw the other day, Padres shortstop Fernando Tatis Jr. swing on a 3-0 pitch, and it kind of, broke social media about the unwritten rules of baseball. Do you think that's a bad look for the MLB, considering that they want to bring up, younger audiences? And when people see this, isn't it kind of like a deterrent? Like, I think it's kind of ridiculous personally. I mean, how about not get to 3-0 and be not down 7 runs? But that's just me.
Yeah, I heard a great point made. I was listening to WFAN. Evan Roberts yesterday said that, someone made a comparison to if a goalie is out of the net in hockey playing the puck and they get run, right? Then all of a sudden, brawl, that's an unwritten rule, right? You don't go and hit the goalie.
Right.
There's nothing in the rule book that says you can't, but you can't hit the goalie if he's out of the net playing the puck. But he brought up a good point that, those, whether it's the NBA or the NHL, I mean, those are games that have clocks, right? So if it's a 5-0 game with in the NHL with 3 minutes left, you're not going to put your stars out on the power play, right? But in baseball, even if you're up 7-0 in the 7th inning, there's no clock to say that the other team can't come back and have a 9-run 8th inning and come back and win the game. So why should you not try to add on runs? I mean, I understand if it's 15-0 in the 9th, then not trying to run up the score. But in a game, that game was close enough that it is feasible. I know unlikely, but feasible that, the Padres could have lost that game. So I think, the unwritten rules are dumb at times. I mean, I think I don't know if it's bad for baseball, but I think they should be doing, especially in the situation that they're in now, doing everything they can to promote their young stars, guys like Tatis, especially, in a market like San Diego that doesn't get a ton of recognition all the time. The more that people are aware of guys like him and realize how good he is, I think it's going to be better for the game in the long haul.
Because I think what the worry is with the MLB is that, it almost seems like, and this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but it almost seems like every pitch is either a home run or a strikeout, especially now with a lot of people have uppercut swings. And do you think that deters people from watching it? Because, back then, a lot of there used to be more balls in play. And I think I saw a stat where it was like, in like the average game, like there's only, I think it's like 8 to 10 minutes where the ball's actually in play. So do you think that might be the reason more so than like the unwritten rules?
Yeah, that's a great, that's a Kenny Albert stat. Every year he comes to our program, he mentions that. He always asks the kids in the camp about the amount of time in play. I don't know. I mean, I think personally, I feel like right now baseball's in a tough spot. I mean, and everybody has a different preference. I would rank, in terms of my interest level, baseball the fourth in my opinion of 4 major sports. Obviously, I watch it because I have to pay attention to all sports to do my job the right way, and I have to know what's going on. But if I have the choice of watching a baseball game compared to an NBA or NHL playoff game, I'm going to watch the NBA or the NHL playoff game. And again, that's just me. So I think people, because they have those options now, are probably more likely to watch the playoff excitement game as opposed to maybe an out-of-market baseball game, and that's the struggle and the competition of baseball keeping the eyeballs because of the slow pace. I don't know how you correct that, where you certainly can't fix it for this season. And some of the things they've tried to do, with the 10th inning, extra inning man on second to try to shorten up the games rule, it kind of annoys the traditionalists, right? The traditionalist fans. So I don't know if there is. Yeah, right. I don't know if there is a good solution for it to try to speed up the game and get more interest. But I think the baseball's just in a tough spot because of everything that happened this summer to even get them on the field and now what they're competing against in terms of people's attention span.
Now I want to transition. I see you got the shirt on. You do play-by-play for the Long Island Nets, the NBA G League affiliate of the Brooklyn Nets. Now, do you find it difficult more so to call a game when there's less people in the crowd? Because, I mean, obviously there's still a little bit of a crowd, but compared to an NBA game, like let's say there's like a big play, for example, like do you notice like in your voice that you have to try harder to get more excited, or are you kind of just like in the game and it gets more stuff? I've always wondered that.
Yeah, it depends. So there have been some good crowds, especially last season, not this past season. So I guess 2 seasons ago now, our team went to the G League finals, and there were some good crowds at the Coliseum, 4,000 or 5,000 people, compared to obviously it's lesser during the week in December, and obviously Long Island trying to build the fan base. It all comes with the territory in the G League. But when they're the lower bowl is pretty full, it gets exciting. I mean, you don't really notice that there's not 16,000 people in the building. There's only 5,000. It still gets loud. There's still a lot of energy. And that's not really, I don't really feel like it affects me. I still feel like that big game energy in the building. But when our first season, we played at Barclays Center in Brooklyn in front of 0 fans because the transition to the Coliseum before the Coliseum was open. And that was definitely a challenge. I realized that the players could hear what I was saying on the court. I have a couple of funny stories if you want them about that. And that was definitely, something to, try to keep up the energy, but then you realize like during a free throw, like they can legitimately hear everything I'm saying. And I was doing the games by myself. So I didn't have anybody to work off with. Now, obviously I have a color analyst, and it's changed over the years. But, long story short, right now, no, I don't really, notice the difference in the energy. But in the past, I definitely did.
Now, sticking with the G League, I know there was that report a couple months ago about some high school players thinking of skipping out on college and going straight to the G League. Are you in favor of that, or should they still get the 1 year? Because I know a lot of people talk about, education and all this stuff, but then the player in high school thinks, well, I can make a little bit of money, get better competition before I go to the NBA. So there's a little bit of a,
Yeah, I think it's unique, the thing that the NBA is doing in order to give these players that want to not go to college an opportunity to to play professionally, make some money, improve their game. From what I understand, it's not going to be a true G League team. It's going to be the G League elite team. There's already 4 or 5 guys that have taken money from the NBA G League in order to go into this program. Like I said, from what I understand, they're not going to play like a true G League schedule. Obviously, we don't know what the G League schedule is going to look like because of the coronavirus and everything next year. But they're going to play some games against G League teams. They're going to play some games against other exhibition, games against other teams, I think, from overseas. And it's basically just a kind of a training and breeding ground for these guys. And I think the way you see guys, some guys develop in a professional setting, professional weight training, professional skill development, as opposed to trying to do those things. Not that the college experience is bad. I mean, I love college basketball, love the NCAA tournament. I would say that I would be disappointed if a lot of guys, skipped out on college and you didn't have that same experience. But for these elite guys to have that extra year of professional weight training, skill development, all that stuff, I think will elevate their games and make them more ready to impact the NBA in certain ways than maybe a guy who spent a year in college, also trying to juggle going to class and everything else that comes with being a college student, in addition to trying to get better at basketball.
And I also think it's kind of similar to the way they do it in Europe, because a lot of people talked about when Luka Doncic came over that he was, really like he had like that professional play style, like type of, where maybe somebody who was in college didn't have that. Because a lot of times you see like a college guy will have a huge season, but then he's not really suited for the NBA. So I think maybe the G League might be able to, mend that gap, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really
get
depends.
them closer to the NBA. I'm saying, like, make it seem like, in terms of like the competition and like the way the NBA is type.
Right. Yeah, it depends on the player, I think. And there are some guys, it's well documented. There are some guys who didn't go to college, but back when you could be, go straight from high school, who flamed out, right? And there are plenty of guys who were one and done who flamed out. And then there were guys who were 4-year players in college and they've become NBA stars, right? Or guys who go to mid-majors. When you talked about Damian Lillard before, he went to Weber State, right? And he went from Weber State to—
Same with McCollum, he went to a smaller school, right?
CJ McCollum went to Lehigh, right? Lillard was the 6th pick in the draft coming out of Weber State. So playing at a mid-major school didn't deter him from, becoming an all-NBA guy. So I think it really depends on the player. Obviously, some things that I feel like as fans, people forget that, these guys mature at different times. I mean, some guys are more, you look at Zion, right? He's more physically ready at 18 or 19 than most guys are, right? Mm-hmm. But then you look at somebody who maybe doesn't physically develop and get their man muscle, so to speak, until they're 23, right? And then they become a so much better player because they become stronger and you can jump higher, whatever, faster. Or again, as I said before, that professional weight training and professional skill development changes guys and their, their ability. So I think it really kind of depends on the player, on who's going to succeed in this kind of environment and who is better off spending 3-4 years in college to get their professional career going.
Now I want to finish off by talking about, I know we've covered all the sports here, but I want to finish off by talking about the NHL and the success of the New York Islanders so far. They defeated the Panthers in 4 games in the qualifying round, and now, I mean, I know they lost last night to the Capitals, but they've been dominating this series. Do you think it's more so the players that have been successful, or is it Barry Trotz?
I think you have to give credit to both. I know a lot of people are quick to give Barry Trotz a lot of credit, which he deserves. He's an outstanding coach. But I think you have to also keep in mind that, the players have bought into his system. And he has guys who have become elevated, have elevated their games within that system, right? It's not, like, in my opinion, I put out a tweet the other day with a stat about, what Adam Pelech did against Alex Ovechkin in Game 3, because he, pretty much took the best goal scorer in the league completely out of the game, right? In Game 3 and the Isles win. But, a guy like Adam Pelech has elevated his game within Barry Trotz's system, right? It's not just the system that's making him a number one defenseman. He has found a way to get to another level. Another guy like that is Brock Nelson, right? He was a guy who was a solid player for many years, and he is now elevated to becoming, I know he's the IL second line center, but he could be a first line center on a lot of teams the way he's played, right? On pace for 30 goals this year before the shortened season, on pace for another career high in points, excellent defensive center. He has really elevated his game. So I think you have to give credit to both. The guys obviously have bought into Trotz's system, and the way that, his style of play obviously lends to the style that the Islanders play. But the guys who have really bought in and improved their games by playing that style have obviously really benefited from it, and they deserve a lot of credit for it too.
And stressing the defensive side more so than previous years, it seems like a lot of these guys like a Barzal or a Beauvillier type, are really focusing on the defensive side too. And they also got that goaltending coach, right? Because Varlamov, nobody really talks about as much as the other guys. Like, he's been pretty good so far in the playoffs.
Yeah, Varlamov's been great. Mitch Korn is the goalie coach that you're talking about, has worked with a lot of elite goaltenders over the years, the goalie whisperer, right, if you will. But, it is that style and that system that they want to play 3-2 games, not 5-4 games.
Right.
But they have guys, you mentioned Barzal and Beauvillier, guys with speed and skill, right, who can break open a game. And we saw Barzal's skills in the Game 3 overtime winner, that's for sure, right? Be able to get behind the defense and score a goal like that. But they have to, and this is part of the thing that makes Trotz such a great coach, they have to buy into playing in the defensive zone if they want to be able to do what they can do in the offensive zone. And the more those guys buy in, you can see it with Barzal watching. If you watch him on a day-to-day basis, there are games where he's kind of freelancing and doing his own thing, and he's been benched a couple times because of that. But when he goes and he plays in the defensive zone and he back checks, then he has more leeway to kind of freelance and do his own thing and be creative when he has the puck in the offensive zone.
Now, not to put you on the spot here, but do you really think that this team has a chance to win it all, or no?
I do. I don't know if they will ever be a favorite in a series. I think that you don't want to get ahead of yourself. I think that right now, the way it looks, the way that all 4 series in the East are 3-1. Mm-hmm. If those 4 teams win that are up 3-1, they'll play Philadelphia in the next round, who I think is the best matchup for them potentially, because as we know, the thing that has gotten the Isles in trouble in the Florida series and last night so far in the Washington series is their penalty kill, right? And putting those 2 teams on the power play. Philly's power play has been even worse than the Islanders' power play so far in the playoffs. They're 1 for 28,
which is pretty hard to do.
Right, exactly. So that is an area where, obviously they have skilled guys and that can turn around, but they don't present as much of a threat in that area. And we know how good the Islanders have been 5-on-5. I think they can play with anybody 5-on-5. So I would say that is a good matchup for them. And then, if you look beyond that, then you're in the conference finals. And when you get to the conference finals, anything can happen. So I do think they have a chance. Again, I don't know if they'll be the favorite in any realm, but that hasn't seemed to bother Barry Trotz's team so far. Even though they were the higher seeded team last year, everybody expected the Penguins to win. They still swept them. And again, they're a game away from, even though they're the underdog in this series, a game away from beating Washington and going to the second round for the second straight year. So I do think they have a shot. And I think that this bubble environment benefits them perhaps more than any other team, because you're seeing that like kind of closeness and camaraderie of a core that has been together for the most part for 7-8 years. Guys like Casey Cizikas, Matt Martin, Anders Lee, Josh Bailey, they've all been together for so long. So you're seeing that cohesiveness as a team, and they play a style that, they can kind of, if that game last night was at the Coliseum, it might be different, or this upcoming Game 5 tomorrow was in Washington, it might be different with those, the crazy fans behind it, but they can kind of take that out because they just play their game. They play the boring structure style. Right. And I think that actually benefits them being in this kind of neutral site environment.
Thanks to Kevin Dexter for joining me on this week's edition of Jack in the Booth. If you want to learn more about the program over at Hofstra, go to hofstra.edu and search Sports Journalism and Broadcasting Institute. Thanks again for watching. I'm Jack McShane.